On behalf of the family, we certainly want to thank Father Kupke for coming today and presiding over the Mass, and for your kind words earlier, and all the family members who assisted. As Father Kupke mentioned, after his retirement, Dad decided to spend his days writing his life story and about his many passions. And he wrote the letters not just to our family members and his friends, but to columnists at the New York Times, to music directors at public radio stations, archivists, university presidents, his old Navy buddies and their families, and many others. And he insisted that each of those letters be copied and be mailed to many, many people as well. Eventually growing tired of running out and spending all their loose change on photocopy machines around North Jersey, Ted and Joe eventually got a copy machine at the house so that we could copy all the letters. And we kept the U.S. Postal Service in business for quite some time. We were his enablers, and many of you probably received many of those letters yourselves. The memories in those letters were intended to be shared, and that is why Dad had them copied and sent to so many people. And so we thought, as a family, that there'd be no better tribute to him than to share with you his own words and his thoughts about music, the church, his faith, his time in service and politics, and his love for his family. And as you'll hear in these words, those things were not separate, but they intersected throughout his life. A recurring theme in all of Dad's writing was his love of music, and especially opera. And if you can imagine that he's writing these letters, often 50 and sometimes 60 years after the events occurred, you can see just what a profound impact opera had on him. It started at a very early age. He wrote, "How it all started. The old Met turned Box 44 into a broadcast studio where Saturday afternoon matinees were broadcast from 1929. We had regular cleaning job assignments in the Meyer household on Saturday mornings. Mine was to wash, wax, and buff the kitchen floor. I discovered the Met broadcast during that time, and I've been a fan ever since." He went to his first opera on New Year's Day in 1940. He was 16 years old. And this is what he recalled 60 years later. "My 12-year-older brother Godfrey said, 'Let's go to the Met as standees,' and we did. Tristan und Isolde with Kirsten Flagstad and Lawrence Melchior. You never forget the Flagstad voice compared with other voices on the opera quiz. Full, but girl-like, as if she had just come in from vacation." Dad's love for the opera brought out his wild side as well. In many of his writings, he tells of the story when he and one of his fellow Fordham students, a gentleman by the name of Bob Ramini, went to see the opera Tristan and then tried to sneak backstage to meet the great Lawrence Melchior. And this is what he wrote. "Bob, a regular attendee at the Mat, said, 'Let's try to visit Melchior in his dressing room.' We paused for a moment to stop on the stage. Then to Melchior's room, up a flight of wooden stairs. He was there, a half-consumed can of dull pineapple juice on his dressing table. We stammered how great he was, and in his heavy Danish accent, he said, 'I'm glad you liked it.'" Dad was the original opera groupie, but his other musical love was church music, which he wrote about extensively, especially his love of Gregorian chant and the Latin Mass. He was particularly disappointed at Vatican II, and is evident from this letter that he wrote to the president of Fordham University. "I was devastated at the collective wisdom of our bishops, downplaying all the heritage of Gregorian music and the use of Latin. I hope that there'll be a Vatican III or IV, and that they'll find and rediscover this motherland." In what is probably his best writing, he wrote a memoir, which he actually titled, "Why I Like Bach's B minor Mass First and Handel's Messiah Second." And in that, Dad wrote, "I rarely play the B minor. Sometimes years have gone by. It grabs me, and so I have to be in an especially receptive mood. My spine is tingling even as I write this. And if I make a mistake in spelling, I'm not going to stop to correct it now. My favorite part, if I have to pin it down to one section, is the Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus chorus, over and over. If you have to explain to someone that Sanctus means holy, something is lost. I think the thing that tips me toward Bach's B minor is the Latin text. Remember, I grew up in the pre-Vatican Church, and so in the 4th grade, I learned the Latin responses to become an altar boy, and I did. I long ago decided that if it were up to me, I'd like to hear it as the last thing of my lifetime. And he did. Many of Dad's writings describe in detail his experiences in World War II. As you heard Father Kupke say, he was a navigator. He was an officer on the USS Poseidon. And there's a particular paragraph in one of his writings that we think shows both his humor and how he viewed the dangers of war. I joined the Navy because they live a reasonably clean life, and they have ice cream and coffee. And if it came to dying, I'd rather die at sea than in a trench. I have the romantic notion of how they used to do it. Tie the sailor in his sea bag and slide it over the side. And as a navigator, it was Dad's job to study the skies and the sea. And he spent an awful lot of time doing those two things. And he wrote this: "The sea, it's not black. There are trillions of little creatures that glow, and flying fish do fly. I think you see stars from that incredible firmament reflected in the sea on a calm night. Wow. Praise our Heavenly Father, whose arrangement since the Big Bang started all of this." Music was never far from his mind, even when he was on the Poseidon. He kept a little Emerson portable radio that he had had through high school and college, and which he had used to listen to the public radio stations that had played the classical music he loved so much. And he was willing to disregard orders in order to keep that radio. He wrote this: "Before sailing the sea, the Navy Department had a thorough inspection, including a look in all of the officer safes. The report came back, there's an unauthorized radio in officer quarters. The captain came stomping in, 'Get rid of it!' And I promised to, but I instead kept the radio locked in my safe until after the war." A story that Dad repeats in a great number of his writings was that he was able to get together with his brother Godfrey, who was in the Army and was stationed in the same theater as Dad in the Pacific. Dad wrote this: "I knew my brother Godfrey was in Okinawa. When our ship came to Okinawa, Godfrey was serving as a chaplain's assistant. I first looked up Godfrey on my birthday, July 12th. Godfrey had a little choir of GIs who had St. Gregory hymnals. The end of the war, VJ Day, was on the Feast of the Assumption, and Godfrey and I sang the High Mass." If you had a chance to see any of the photos back at the funeral hall, or if you come to the reception afterwards, you'll see a photo of Dad on the Poseidon, Christmas 1945, leading the choir of men in singing Christmas carols. It is a treasured memory for all of us.